In the early hours of November 19, 1984, the town of San Juan Ixhuatepec, commonly known as San Juanico, on the outskirts of Mexico City, was just beginning to stir. Located near a sprawling industrial complex, the town was home to thousands of working-class families. Life in San Juanico had its challenges, but the peaceful routine of daily life was about to be obliterated by a disaster of unimaginable proportions. Without warning, the skies would erupt in flames, and in a matter of minutes, San Juanico would become the site of one of the deadliest industrial accidents in history.
At approximately 5:40 a.m., a massive explosion ripped through the San Juanico liquid petroleum gas (LPG) storage facility operated by Pemex, Mexico's state-owned oil company. The explosion was so powerful that it could be heard from miles away, sending shockwaves through the surrounding area. The initial blast was followed by a series of violent secondary explosions, each one more devastating than the last. LPG tanks exploded like bombs, launching flaming debris into the air and setting off a massive firestorm that engulfed the surrounding neighborhoods. The fire burned with such intensity that the ground shook, and a deadly wall of flames rapidly spread outward, trapping thousands of residents in their homes.
As the firestorm raged, panic quickly spread through the town of San Juanico. The explosions triggered a chain reaction that caused over 50 large storage tanks to explode in quick succession, each tank holding thousands of highlands of highly flammable LPG. The massive fireballs that erupted into the sky could be seen from miles away, and soon the entire industrial complex was engulfed in flames. The fire spread to nearby homes, factories, and businesses, turning the once quiet town into an inferno. With the roads blocked by debris and the fire spreading at an alarming rate, many residents were trapped. Those who could flee ran through the streets, some with their clothes and skin on fire, desperately seeking safety as the fire consumed everything in its path.
The human toll of the San Juanico disaster was staggering. Official reports indicate that more than 500 people lost their lives in the explosions and subsequent fire, though the true number may never be known. Hundreds of bodies were burned beyond recognition, making identification impossible. Thousands more were injured, many suffering from severe burns and other life-threatening injuries. Hospitals in Mexico City were overwhelmed with the injured, and emergency responders worked around the clock to rescue survivors from the wreckage. Entire families were wiped out, homes were reduced to ashes, and the survivors were left to grapple with the unimaginable loss of their loved ones and their livelihoods.
In the aftermath of the disaster, an investigation revealed that the explosion had been caused by a leak in one of the LPG tanks. The leaking gas had accumulated in the air until it ignited, triggering the massive explosions. The storage facility, which housed millions of gallons of highly flammable gas, was located dangerously close to residential areas, a factor that significantly increased the death toll. The investigation uncovered a series of safety violations and poor maintenance practices at the facility, raising questions about the oversight of such hazardous operations. Many experts argued that the disaster could have been prevented if proper safety protocols had been followed, making the tragedy all the more heartbreaking for the victims and their families.
As the fires continued to burn throughout the day, emergency services from Mexico City and surrounding areas raced to contain the blaze. Firefighters, police, and military personnel battled the flames, risking their lives to prevent further explosions. Despite their efforts, it took nearly 16 hours to bring the fire under control. By then, much of San Juanico had been reduced to rubble. The intense heat from the flames caused steel to melt, and the ground was scorched black, leaving behind a desolate landscape. The firefighters were hailed as heroes for their bravery in the face of overwhelming danger, but for many, the damage had already been done.
The San Juanico disaster sent shockwaves throughout Mexico. In the days following the tragedy, the nation was plunged into mourning. Flags were flown at half-mast, and memorial services were held to honor the victims. The sight of charred remains, burned-out vehicles, and the devastated town left an indelible mark on the country's collective memory. The Mexican government declared a national emergency, and aid was sent to the survivors. But for many, it was too little, too late. The disaster exposed the vulnerability of communities living near industrial complexes and raised urgent questions about safety regulations, corporate responsibility, and the protection of human life.
Rebuilding San Juanico was a monumental task. The disaster had wiped out entire neighborhoods, leaving thousands homeless and traumatized. In the months that followed, efforts were made to clear the debris and rebuild the community, but the psychological scars of the disaster were harder to heal. Survivors spoke of the nightmares they continued to experience: the sound of the explosions, the sight of loved ones consumed by flames, and the overwhelming sense of loss. Government aid programs were established to help survivors rebuild their lives, but for many, the memory of that fateful day would never fade.
The San Juanico disaster remains one of the deadliest industrial accidents in history, and its legacy continues to shape Mexico's approach to industrial safety. In the years following the tragedy, the Mexican government enacted stricter safety regulations for industrial plants and storage facilities, particularly those handling hazardous materials. New laws required companies to improve maintenance, conduct regular safety checks, and ensure that industrial operations were located at a safe distance from residential areas. Despite these changes, the memory of San Juanico serves as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences that can result from negligence and a lack of oversight.
The San Juanico disaster forever changed the way Mexico viewed industrial safety and disaster preparedness. The horror of that day, when fire rained down from the sky and families were torn apart in an instant, left an indelible mark on the nation. For the survivors, the memories of loss, fear, and destruction remain etched in their minds. Today, memorials stand in San Juanico to honor the victims of the disaster, a sobering reminder of the tragedy that once consumed the town. The disaster not only claimed hundreds of lives but also reshaped Mexico's industrial landscape, forcing the country to confront the dangers of unchecked industrial expansion.